What is one thing that all artists need in their studio? That's a good, solid workbench table. I realized I didn't have one, so I went ahead and built one. Tables are so important. Last week, when reorganizing my studio, I said to myself, what does this place really need? And what it really needed was a workbench. Once I decided to build the table, I asked myself, how can this table come together in a way that's cheap, but also strong and functional? I really didn't want to buy anything. I did, in the end, have to buy 4 casters, which were not cheap, but it beats buying a whole entire table. That's a philosophy I always have as a designer, is like, what's available, what can be utilized, and how can I use the resources around me to my best advantage instead of spending money to solve a problem? I sketched out a loose idea in my notebook with a Sharpie, and then I just got right to cutting. In terms of materials for this project, I got my hands on some scrap 2-inch angle iron and 1-inch square tubing. And my whole goal was to use as minimal materials as possible to create the strongest possible frame. The wood top that I found for the project is like really old and made out of a hardwood, and it's super heavy and about 3 inches thick. And so the base really needed to be able to support that weight, but also I just didn't want to throw a ton of steel in it. I wanted it to be kind of structural but light. This is the kind of project I like to call a build as you go project. It's one where you just kind of start building it and then you react to what happens along the way. I ended up using the 2-inch angle for kind of the leg pieces that were almost shaped like an H, and then I used the 1-inch tubing for the lateral supports that ran kind of across the width of the table. We're back at the CNC plasma cutter, this time to cut plates for the casters so that I could attach them to the bottom of the table. If machines could be children, this CNC plasma cutter would definitely be my baby. It's just so accurate and reliable, and I just love working with it. And as long as you give her good vibes and kindness and maintenance, she will treat you right. I did not measure correctly when I was cutting the holes for the caster plates, and so I ended up having to drill them out later. So measure twice, cut once. It happens to the best of us. What can you do? Something that I have a love-hate relationship with is angle grinding. It is necessary for metal workers and welders. It's such a cool and useful tool, and honestly, angle grinding kind of makes you feel like a badass. But on the flip side, it exacerbates my carpal tunnel, and so that's not always fun. But as they say, do your best, grind the rest. Quite possibly one of my favorite shop sayings of all time. Between the angle grinder and the disc belt sander, I cleaned up all the parts and I was able to grind a little bevel into the lower edge of the tubing so that it could sit nicely within the inner radius of the angle iron. I was overjoyed to get my metal shop area set up for this project. In one of these videos, I'll have to give a tour. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in that. Getting the leg pieces clamped up was a bit time consuming, but I've always found that when I'm welding, the more time I spend in the setup and getting that right, then the easier it is to actually weld the parts together and the better outcome I tend to have. Rushing through the setup process has always caused me to make mistakes later down the line, and that is no good. We don't want that. We don't need it. This project was built with a Miller Multimatic 215 welder. It is a really awesome tool. I can't recommend it enough for anybody who needs an at-home welding setup. Not only can it do MIG, TIG, and stick welding, but it can also switch from a 110 to a 220 power source with just the swap of a plug. So Miller, not a sponsor, but hey, do you want to sponsor a tiny channel like me? Might be cool. Also, if you're enjoying this video, I'd be so happy if you click the subscribe button. I'm just trying to get better little by little, so let me know if you like what you're seeing. Okay, back to it. After letting the tacks cool, I ran beads in kind of critical points of connection for the frame, and I'm definitely not the world's best welder. Admittedly, I'm more of a grinder, to be honest. However, I think I've marginally improved over the years, and hopefully I'll just keep getting better. Once I made one leg frame, I just rinsed and repeated the process to make the other one. Given my less than level work table, I was really happy with how the parts turned out. They were square, they were symmetrical, and they were going to work to build a strong and sturdy base. One of the first metalworking projects I ever did was a simple rectangular frame, and I was so proud of it. It was pretty. I sanded the whole thing down really nice, and I showed my professor at the time, and he took one look at it and just said, "Those are bad welds." And so that really stuck with me and kind of lit a fire under me to get better at welding at the very least and keep doing projects. And I'm so glad I did, because I have learned so much about metalworking, and now I get to teach it to students through my job and through the classes I teach. So that's really special. Admittedly, the situation was less than ideal for doing this larger final assembly. My welding work table was just not level enough all the way across the board to really work well for assembling the table on that. So I ended up doing it just on the dirt, on the ground. It honestly didn't work out too bad. We made it work. Once it was kind of together and C-clamped, I went through and just tacked everything in place, making sure to keep it square and tight with itself. Then in random order, I went through and I just ran all the beads where everything was overlapping to strengthen it up. At some point, I realized the structure was just a little bit too minimal. The long length of those horizontal support beams meant that the middle just kind of felt like it had a little bit of a flex. I kept it on the safe side and decided to cut one more piece of square tubing to go perpendicularly across the top of the table. Once I got that cut and welded in, it was so much more sturdy, and that was definitely like the piece it needed to make it super strong. My final move here was to bend some L brackets using my anvil and a hammer, and these brackets were going to be used to attach the wood top to the steel base using lag bolts. So super simple, but really effective and useful for something like this. So after I got all the parts welded on, I brought the frame inside my studio from my metalworking area. For whatever reason, I didn't get B-roll of this portion of the project, but what I ended up doing was using lag screws to bolt the tabletop to the steel frame, and then I used little bolts to attach the casters to all 4 of the feet. Check it out, here's the final table in my studio setup. I couldn't be happier with how this build turned out. It's really lightweight and sturdy, it rolls around super easily, and honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better table to kind of anchor this entire space back here. Next time you're feeling bored or in a creative rut, I encourage you to build a table. Tables are so important. Thanks for joining me at Kirsten Angerbauer Studio today. I had so much fun sharing this project with you, and I had so much fun doing the project. Let me know if you'd want to see a studio tour video where you can see this workbench on wheels in action. If you're feeling it, subscribe to the channel. Also, subscribe to the newsletter. The first 100 people to sign up are going to get a digital gift that you're not going to want to miss. As always, stay safe, make beautiful things, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. So, come along. Okay, I don't know why I write these cards and then I don't say what I was planning on saying.